The horse screamed first, then the wheel. Imogen Thornberry felt the carriage lurch sideways before she understood why, and by the time she understood why, the door had already swung open onto empty road, rushing past like water. She grabbed the frame. Her knuckles went white. Her breath came out in short, hard pulls, faster than she could control. The coachman was shouting something she couldn't hear, over the wind and the grinding of the axle. One wheel had come loose. Not broken, loose. She would remember that detail later, turn it over and over, because a wheel does not simply come loose on a smooth road in fair weather. The carriage tipped. She threw herself toward the low side, rather than wait to be thrown. And the ditch came up to meet her, hard, knocking the air from her lungs, and the world went sideways, and green, and then still. For a moment, she only lay there, staring up at October sky, through a tangle of hedge branches, listening to her own heartbeat slam against her ribs. If you have ever felt the ground disappear beneath you and lived to tell it, stay with me, because Imogen Thornberry is about to learn that surviving was only the beginning of her trouble. Footsteps, boots on gravel, running. Miss Thornberry, a hand closed around her arm, pulled her upright too fast, and her vision swam. Miss Thornberry, can you hear me? She knew the voice before she knew the face. His Grace the Duke of Kendall did not usually trouble himself to ride this road, and he certainly did not trouble himself to look this alarmed. Not the man the county called cold enough to freeze a kettle. I can hear you, she managed. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which surprised her. The wheel. Did you see the wheel come off? I saw your carriage go into a ditch, which was quite enough for one morning. He crouched beside her, checking her arms, her head, with quick, impersonal hands, the way a man checks a horse for a broken leg before he lets himself feel anything about it. Nothing broken. You were fortunate. I don't think fortune had anything to do with it. She sat up, despite his hand on her shoulder, telling her not to. Her eyes had already found the wheel, thrown clear of the wreck, resting against the hedge. Look at it. Please, just look. He looked. She watched his face change. The bolt that should have held the wheel to the axle was gone entirely. Not sheared. Not rusted through. Gone. The way a thing is gone when a hand has removed it. When did you last have this carriage inspected? He asked, very quietly now. Yesterday. My uncle's man looked it over himself before I left for church this morning. She heard her own words land and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the ditch water soaking through her skirts. He looked it over himself, Your Grace. Neither of them said the rest of it aloud. Neither of them needed to. 3 months. That was how long Imogen had lived at Ashcombe Hall, since her father's death left her in the guardianship of his half-brother, a man she had met perhaps a dozen times in her whole life, before he became, overnight, the only family she had. Mr. Josiah Camden had been perfectly civil, perfectly attentive. He had seen to her allowance, her wardrobe, her invitations, everything a dutiful guardian ought to see to, and she had told herself the unease she felt in his company was only grief wearing strange colors. She was no longer certain grief was the whole of it. Come, the Duke said, and there was something new in his voice, something that had not been there a moment ago, a kind of grim attention. You'll not walk back to that house alone, not until I understand what happened to your wheel. You think someone meant this. I think, he said carefully, that bolts do not vanish. I think a man who wanted to be very sure of an accident would remove one and let the road do the rest. And I think you should not say so to anyone at Ashcombe Hall until we know a great deal more than we do now. She stood, and her legs held her, though only barely, and she pressed one hand flat against the cold trunk of a beech tree to steady herself while the world stopped swaying. Why would anyone want me dead? The word came out of her before she could soften it, blunt and terrible in the quiet morning. The Duke did not answer at once. He was looking past her, back toward the ruined carriage, and his jaw had gone tight in a way that told her he had already thought of an answer, and did not like it. "Your father was a wealthy man," he said at last. "My father left everything to me. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that when you marry, or when you turn 21, whichever comes first, that fortune passes out of trust and into your own hands." He looked at her directly now. "How old are you, Miss Thornbury?" Her mouth had gone dry. "I will be 21 in November." 6 weeks, the Duke said. The wind moved through the hedge. Somewhere down the lane, the coachman was still trying to calm the horse, and the ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning went on around them as if nothing at all had happened, as if a girl had not nearly died on a smooth road, in fair weather, 6 weeks before a fortune was due to become entirely her own. "My uncle would not," Imogen started, and stopped, because she heard how thin it sounded even to her own ears. "Perhaps not," the Duke said, in a tone that meant he believed the opposite. "But someone in that household had reason to look very closely at your carriage yesterday, and reason enough to be careless about being seen doing it. And I would not go home tonight and eat what is put in front of you, without asking who prepared it." Imogen looked at him. This cold, watchful man, the whole county swore, felt nothing for anyone, and found that his eyes, fixed on hers, held no coldness at all, only a kind of fierce, focused attention she had never once had turned on her in 3 months, under her uncle's roof. "You believe me," she said. "You believe someone did this on purpose. I believe," he said, "that you are about to go home to a house where someone wants you gone before November, and that you cannot prove it, and that if you say one word of what you suspect, before you have proof, you will only teach them to be more careful the second time." The second time. The words landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, and she felt the ripples of it move through her long after he had finished speaking, because until that moment she had not let herself think there might be a second time at all. Behind them, down the lane, a second set of hoofbeats was approaching fast, and Imogen turned to see one of her uncle's own grooms riding hard toward the wreck, his face already arranged into the practiced shape of alarm, and she had exactly long enough to wonder whether that alarm was real before he reached them and called out her name. The groom pulled up hard enough to make his horse skitter sideways, and swung down before it had fully stopped. "Miss Thornbury." His eyes went to the ditch, the tipped carriage, the wheel resting against the hedge, in that order, and Imogen watched each of them land. "Thank God. We heard the horse scream from the stable yard." "Did you?" the Duke said, in a voice so mild it barely qualified as a question. The groom's gaze flicked to him, taking in the fine coat, the unhurried stance, and something shifted behind his eyes, a small recalculation. "Your Grace, I didn't see you there." Evidently, Imogen felt the tension between the two men without understanding all of it, only that the Duke had gone very still in the particular way of a man listening for a false note in a song he knew well. "Robert, isn't it?" the Duke said. "You've served in the Camden stables some years." 6 years, Your Grace." Robert's chin came up a fraction. A man asked to account for himself, and not entirely sure why. "I saddled Miss Thornbury's own mare not an hour past. Would have ridden with the carriage myself. Only Mr. Camden wanted me at the house for the ironwork." "The ironwork," the Duke repeated. "New hinges for the cellar door, Your Grace. Nothing more than that." It was nothing, said plainly, the way an honest man says a plain thing, and yet Imogen saw the Duke file it away, exactly as he had filed away the missing bolt, without comment, without expression, the way a man puts a card back into his sleeve to play later. "Help the coachman right the wheel," the Duke said. "Miss Thornbury will ride back with me. Her nerves have had quite enough of carriages for one morning." Robert looked to Imogen, as if for confirmation that this was permitted, and she found she did not much care whether it was permitted or not. "Yes," she said. "Thank you, Robert." He went to the wreck. The Duke offered his hand to help her onto his own horse, and as she took it, he leaned close enough that only she could hear him. "Say nothing of the bolt in that house," he murmured. Not to Robert, not to your uncle, not to your own maid, however much you trust her. Do you understand me? I understand that you suspect everyone. I suspect no one in particular yet, he said, which is precisely why I suspect everyone a little. It is safer that way, Miss Thornbury, until the ground under your feet stops moving. They rode the mile to Ashcombe Hall mostly in silence, Imogen seated before him with his arm a steady bar across her middle, and she found herself noticing small things she had never noticed on a horse before. The warmth of him at her back, the particular quiet way he breathed, in and out, even and unhurried, as though nothing in the whole of England could startle him. It should have frightened her, being carried home by a man the county called cold. It did the opposite. The house came into view, gray stone against a gray sky, and her uncle was already on the steps waiting, having heard, no doubt, the same commotion that had brought Robert running. Imogen. Josiah Camden came down the steps 2 at a time, his face a careful arrangement of horror. Good God, child, what happened? They told me the carriage went over. A wheel came loose, Imogen said, and watched her uncle's face as she said it, the way the Duke had taught her to watch, in the space of a single mile's ride. She saw nothing. No flicker, no tightening, nothing but ordinary alarm, and she did not know whether that meant he was innocent, or simply very good. Loose, her uncle repeated. That carriage was inspected not 2 days past. I'll have the man's license for this. Will you? The Duke said, dismounting, and there was that mildness in his voice again. The mildness Imogen was beginning to understand was not mildness at all, but a blade held very still. Your Grace. Her uncle's eyes went to him properly for the first time, and something crossed his face that might have been surprise, or might have been calculation. Imogen could not yet tell the two apart on him. I did not know you had made Imogen's acquaintance. I made it this morning, in a ditch, the Duke said. A fortunate coincidence, or your niece would have walked home alone and shaken. I trust you'll see the carriage properly examined this time, by someone other than your own man. The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat, but Imogen felt it stretch, felt her uncle recalculate something behind his eyes, exactly as Robert had, and she understood in that heartbeat that whatever else was true, her uncle did not like being watched, and had not expected to be. Of course, Josiah Camden said smoothly. Whatever you think best, Your Grace. Come inside, Imogen. You're soaked through and shivering. We'll have Mrs. Adderley draw you a bath and something warm. If you have ever smiled at someone, while your whole body told you not to trust the room, you already know exactly what Imogen felt walking up those steps. She went inside. The Duke did not follow, and something in her chest sank at the sight of his horse turning back down the drive, though she could not have said why his absence should matter so much after knowing him the length of a single ride. That night, she did not eat what was put in front of her. She sat at the long table with her uncle across from her, the same table where she had eaten every night for 3 months without a second thought, and she watched Mrs. Adderley set down the soup, and she thought of the Duke's voice, telling her not to eat what was prepared for her, and her spoon stayed exactly where it was. You've no appetite, her uncle observed, not looking up from his own bowl. I had a fright this morning, Imogen said. I find my stomach hasn't settled. Understandable. He ate on, unbothered, and she watched him do it, watched the ordinary rhythm of a man taking his supper, and told herself that a guilty man does not eat his soup so calmly in front of the girl he has just tried to kill. She told herself that, and did not quite believe it. Later, alone in her room, she sat by the cold hearth, with a shawl pulled tight, and turned the whole day over in her hands like a stone, exactly the way she imagined the Duke would. The bolt, gone clean, not broken. Robert and his ironwork, so plain it might have been true, or might have been the exact kind of plane a careful man builds on purpose. Her uncle's face, giving nothing away, which might mean he had nothing to give, or might mean he had spent 3 months learning to give nothing at all. 6 weeks until her birthday. 6 weeks until a fortune passed out of a trust and into her own 2 hands, and whoever wanted it before then had already tried once, on a smooth road, in fair weather, with a bolt that did not simply vanish on its own. A soft knock came at her door, so quiet she almost missed it. "Miss Thornberry." A woman's voice, low, urgent, not Mrs. Adderley's. "It's Nan, from the kitchens. I've something you ought to see, and I daren't say it where the walls might hear." Imogen crossed the cold floor and opened the door a hand's width, and found a young kitchen maid standing in the dark hallway, with a candle shaking slightly in her grip, and an expression on her face that told Imogen, before a single word was spoken, that the ground beneath her feet was about to move again. Nan slipped inside and pulled the door shut behind her before she spoke, her candle throwing long shadows up the walls. "I heard it by accident, miss. I swear it. I was fetching coals for Mr. Camden's study, and the door wasn't latched proper." Her voice dropped lower still. "He was talking to a man I've never seen in this house before. A solicitor, by the sound of the papers between them. Go on." "They spoke of a boating party, miss. Tomorrow, at Faro Lake. Mr. Camden's own idea, he said. A treat for you after your fright this morning. Something to settle your nerves." Nan's candle shook harder, and the solicitor said, plain as anything, that if a young lady were to meet with a mishap on the water before her birthday, with no family left to claim otherwise, the estate would revert to her nearest guardian entire, and no court would trouble itself to ask why a grieving man's niece had drowned. The cold that moved through Imogen this time did not come from ditch water. He said drowned. Those exact words. "Those exact words, miss." And Mr. Camden laughed, quiet-like, and said the first attempt had taught him patience wasn't the trouble. Carelessness was, and next time, there'd be no bolt to find. Imogen sat down hard on the edge of her bed, because her legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold her. "You must go to the Duke of Kendal," she said. "Tonight. Now. Tell no one else where you're going. Miss, it's gone 11. And the roads—" Nan. Imogen took the girl's free hand in both of hers, ditch-cold fingers wrapped around trembling ones. "If you do not go, I will be dead by tomorrow evening, and so, I think, will you, the moment he learns what you overheard. Take my mare. She's fast, and she knows the road even in the dark." Nan went. Imogen did not sleep. She sat by the cold hearth with her shawl pulled tight and a poker gripped in one hand, not because she believed a poker would save her, but because holding something solid kept her hands from shaking, and she counted the hours by the guttering candle, until, near 2 in the morning, she heard hoofbeats in the drive, more than one horse this time, and her whole body went taut as a drawn bowstring. She did not open her door until she heard his voice in the hall below, low and clipped, giving orders to men she did not recognize. She came down the stairs in her dressing gown, candle in hand, and found the Duke of Kendal standing in her uncle's own front hall at 2 in the morning, with a magistrate beside him, and 2 constables at the door, and her uncle himself, descending the opposite stair in his nightshirt, blinking against the lamplight, like a man dragged up from sleep. "What in God's name is the meaning of this?" Josiah Camden said, and his voice held exactly the right amount of outrage, the same practiced outrage Imogen had watched him wear over her soup that evening. "The meaning," the Duke said, "is that a kitchen maid rode 4 miles in the dark on a lady's mare to tell me you've arranged a drowning for tomorrow's boating party, and that you told your solicitor there'd be no bolt to find this time." For one instant, one bare instant before the mask came down again, Imogen watched her uncle's face come apart exactly the way she had watched it hold together over supper, and in that instant, she saw the whole truth of the man laid bare. 3 months of careful civility, built over nothing but arithmetic and patience. Preposterous, he managed. Some servant's fever dream, and you'd wake a magistrate for it at this hour. "I sent a man to Mr. Halloway's office an hour past," the Duke said. "Your solicitor, I believe." He was rather more forthcoming than you'll find comfortable. Once he understood the alternative was standing trial beside you. Something in Josiah Camden's face changed then, some final calculation failing to balance, and he moved so fast that Imogen barely saw it, a hand darting toward the small table by the stair, where a letter knife lay forgotten among the post. The Duke moved faster. He caught her uncle's wrist before the blade had cleared the table, twisted it hard enough to make the man gasp and drop it ringing to the floor, and put him bodily against the wall, with a force that shook the framed portraits. "You will not touch her," the Duke said, very quietly, very close to her uncle's ear. "Not tonight, not ever again. And if you so much as look at her wrongly before the constables, have you in irons, I will forget entirely that I am a gentleman." The constables closed in. Josiah Camden did not struggle further, only stared past the Duke's shoulder at Imogen, standing on the stairs with her candle burning steady in her hand, and whatever he had meant to say to her died unspoken as they took his arms and led him out into the dark toward a waiting cart. The front door stood open on the cold night, long after the sound of the cart had faded, and Imogen realized she was still holding her candle, her arm aching from the grip of it, and that her whole body had begun, finally, to shake. The Duke crossed the hall to her in 3 strides, and steadied her with both hands on her shoulders, exactly as he had in the ditch that morning, checking her over with quick, careful attention, before he let himself say anything at all. "You are safe," he said. "Do you hear me, Miss Thornberry? Whatever else is true tonight, you are safe." "I heard him laugh," she said. "Nan said he laughed when he spoke of it." "I know. I don't think I will forget that for a long while." "No," the Duke agreed, and did not try to tell her otherwise, did not offer her some easy comfort she would have seen through in an instant. "I don't imagine you will." Outside, the constable's cart was already turning down the drive toward the county road, carrying away the only family Imogen Thornberry had left in the world, and somewhere behind them in the dark kitchen, a young maid sat wrapped in a blanket, with a cup of something hot going cold in her hands, having ridden 4 miles through the night, and saved a life she had no obligation whatsoever to save. Imogen stood in the open doorway with the candle burning low between her fingers, watching the lanterns of the cart shrink to nothing along the black road, and felt the cold night air on her face, and did not go back inside.